Hi, this is Robert Clickybeard and David Anderson with the Commercial Landscaper podcast. We're going to take 20 minutes of your life to deliver some amazing business content from accomplished leaders to bring you value, to scale your business, and to better yourself personally. And really hopefully you enjoyed. Cheers, everyone. Hi, this is Robert Clickybeard with the Commercial Landscaper podcast. I'm super excited today to be joined by Kamber Parker. Kamber, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell my audience a little bit about you, your background, and just so they can learn more from you.
So I am from originally Baltimore, Maryland, and made my way down south to Greenville, South Carolina, where I currently live. And I got down here because of school. So I went to Furman University. It's a small liberal arts school in South Carolina, and stuck around. So I actually went to Chattanooga for 1 year and then made my way back to Greenville. So I just kind of knew for a long time that the Southeast was where I wanted to be. And that's really how I started my company, the YoPro Know. But for the last 4 years, I've actually been a development director for the Greenville Area Parkinson's Society and building my business. And I'll get all into the details today about what that is, but that's a really high level overview of where I started and how I got here.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, obviously I now live in Greenville, and great part of the world. If you haven't been here, try not to get too many people come here.
Yeah. We don't want too many.
Yeah. So I'm going to jump right into it. So tell me, what is the YoPro Know? I was trying to figure that out when you mentioned that to me. So I'd love the audience to find out more.
Yeah, so it is always a little confusing right away, but once you say it, Robert, you're going to be hearing it all the time. It's going to roll off the tongue. But YoPro, for the audience listening, YoPro is short for young professionals. So the YoPro Know, KNOW, really started because I wanted to share with people all of the benefits that young professionals could bring. I think that young professionals who are aged 21 to 39 sometimes get a pretty bad rep in the workplace, but we really do have a lot to offer. And so we do know what's going on. And so that's how the YOPRONO got its name. And as many of you can relate who are listening, businesses go through many iterations, especially at the beginning. And so my business, the YOPRONO, started as a blog back in 2018. I had a first really not so great job experience. And I was working for a big Fortune 250 insurance company. A lot of people who follow my story have kind of known that from the beginning. And that's really what started the business, because I wanted to see what else was out there. And so I started interviewing young professionals from across the country in various stages of life, regions, and industries. Today, it's about 500, a little over 500 interviews across the country with these young professionals. And about 2 years ago, I realized that I had this really expansive network that extended long, beyond just the people I've interviewed, but also a really amazing network of people who have been, supporting the business from day one. And so today, the YOPRONO as a business is a consulting service. So we help businesses better increase their recruitment and retention efforts of young professionals.
Cool. No, I'm going to definitely dive into that, but I can almost see some of the audience and maybe rolling their eyes and say, oh, these, young professionals, they've got a bad work ethic. They want tons of money, but they don't have the experience. They don't have the work ethic that I used to have back 15, 20 years ago. I'm sure you've probably heard some of those comments, but I'd love you to, I suppose, just start by talking about that, why they have that type of attitude, and what are some of the things that can be done to overcome that.
Mm-hmm. So you were absolutely right, Robert. People definitely think this way. And one of my very first virtual speaking opportunities a few years ago was talking to HR professionals about how they basically should keep young professionals happy. It was what young professionals want, or what YoPros want. And I'll never forget that this one woman asked me, she was like, well, why should we, the generation, 2 generations above you, why should we give in to what you want? Why should we give in to your demands? And I had an answer for her, but I wanted everyone to recognize that I knew what she was asking. Like I wasn't just, your typical young professional, because I am. What makes, me a unique fit for your business is I'm a young professional too. I'm your ideal candidate. And so I wanted everyone in the audience to know that I also knew what she was asking. Like I was hearing her. And my answer to that is young professionals. Yes, we are part of, the Gen Z and millennial generations. We are used to getting what we want, right? Like we're the trophy generation. I think we talked about that the first time we spoke. We're used to kind of getting that participation trophy for everything that we do. And we have been attached to our phones forever, really for most of our lives. And we're so used to that instant gratification. And so when we transfer that into the workplace, there's going to be some conflict between other generations that are looking at this. So to answer your question about how do we overcome this, what we need to do is, the answer is not, giving into what we want. I'm not telling you, Robert, to, do whatever Kamber says because that's going to make the workplace better. I'm telling you that we need to meet each other halfway. So you, as the experienced professional, that's what I call people who are not young professionals. The experienced professionals need to utilize the experience that they have, right? So you guys have been in the workplace longer. Show your leadership. This is a great way to kind of sharpen the experienced professionals who maybe aren't managers. Like that's a really great way to sharpen their leadership skills by just understanding and trying to understand where we're coming from. Think of the different life events that have happened up to this point. For some of us who are just getting into the workplace, we've kind of seen a lot at a young age. So acknowledging what we've gone through and meeting us halfway. On the flip side, young professionals need to do the same, right? And so we need to assess what experienced professionals have gone through in their careers. And we need to understand that it can't just be, us coming in and making all of these changes. So there has to be this dialogue, there has to be conversation. And that's a really big takeaway from 500 plus interviews, is that the communication is why people stay or leave a company. So that being said, I'll wrap up my answer by saying we just need to make sure that there's really good dialogue. And I don't think there is that right now in the workplace.
No, I would agree 100%. And when you talk about the dialogue, I mean, is that best done through what you've seen work successfully is that one-on-one conversation, or mediator is the wrong term, but is there somebody else that can help those conversations along? Mm-hmm. Because if you're coming from two totally different ends of the spectrum, they may not necessarily gel initially, but what's the best successful way of making it?
The number one tool that I recommend, and this is something that I can do for companies, but I recommend that you try to do this yourself if you can and if you have the resources, but to try to establish a young professional specific onboarding process. So most companies have onboarding, but what happens in those onboarding sessions? You talk about HR, you talk about the company policies. Some of it is probably, most of it is, on a screen, and it's really not super personal. So what I recommend is, if you have it and you have the capacity to do this, bring in current young professionals at your business and have them speak to the new young professionals who are coming on board. What this does is it creates an opportunity for vulnerability. So you need to let the young professionals who already work there know that they're going to be safe if they share some kind of, tough things. And what I mean by that is, current young professionals who work there, they are going to be the best voices for the people who are starting to work there. They're going to be the people who are going to say, listen, it's not going to be easy right away working here, because nothing ever is, right? The first 6 months is typically just drinking from a fire hose. And so you need people to actually start right off the bat by saying that, and it will increase your chances of retaining those people, particularly young professionals, by at least 50%, because they just haven't been, most companies don't start off right away. And so again, I kind of got veered off on your question, but going back to your original question, we really are looking for just that openness. And so usually a manager is a great person for that, but in the instance that the manager might be not the best suited for it, I would recommend bringing in a third party. So that could look like somebody like me, that could look like maybe the boss's boss, and just having a third person in the mix really does help.
No, that's great. I love that answer. Is part, I mean, I know a lot of companies struggle even with that onboarding process, which I feel personally that is probably one of the best things a company can do, especially if they're trying to keep an employee, whatever age, here for the long term. But have you ever seen the use of maybe like a navigator to help, somebody that's maybe an existing employee, maybe in the same, demographics, that could shadow that person and just help them along in that first 90, 120 days?
Absolutely. Yeah. So a navigator, a guide, a mentor, those are all great things that companies can implement. I really believe, so I think mentoring is wonderful. I do think that people get a lot more out of it when they reach out and try to and almost like find that mentor on their own, because you're going to be the one who's a little bit more inclined and motivated to establish contact, to reach out. Sometimes what I've seen at companies, if they offer a mentorship, people don't take it. But that is certainly something that if a company feels like it's a good strategy for them, and maybe that's the best offer they can do right now, if they can't establish the onboarding that I suggested earlier, then I think a mentorship or a navigator, as you said, is a great opportunity.
That's cool. Awesome. So I'm going to jump back into, so why did you start this business? Was there something that really prompted you or gave you sort of an opportunity to jump into it?
Yes. So my first job, as I mentioned earlier, that was the Fortune 250 insurance company. And I just really hated it, for lack of a better word. Today, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, because it's the reason I started the YoPro Know. It's the reason I came back to Greenville and started working for the Greenville Area Parkinson's Society as a development director, where I've learned, so many skills, and I have a personal connection to Parkinson's. So it just, there's so many really amazing things that going to this job for a year did. And really the start of the YoPro Know came because I wanted to see what else was out there. I had always thought that climbing the corporate ladder was what I had to do in order to be successful in life. And, I think a lot of times college and high school and just really society makes young people feel like there's only a few paths they can take: medical field, law, politics, maybe, finance. But there's so many opportunities out there and within that. And so if you go on my website, you'll see, if you hover over interviews, you can choose which industry you want to check out. So there's hundreds of interviews from different categories. And, within those categories, like within the finance, you might see somebody who works for a nonprofit that deals with finance, but you also might see somebody who's an investment banker. So there's just a really wide array, and a lot of people don't know that growing up. So that's really what I started the YoPro Know for. But certainly what I'm doing now is not what I originally had planned, which, again, I think a lot of people listening can probably relate to that.
Cool. No, I love it. I love your ideas about how to get into it. What companies are you currently working with? Is there certain companies you target, or are you just working with a general range of companies right now, and then maybe specialize when you get a ton of business coming in?
Yeah. So right now, what I'm finding is the industries that are looking for help the most are the tech industry, the finance industry, and then the marketing industry. So very different fields. Right now, I'm looking to work with a general, industries, but really that mid to large size companies. That's really who I'm looking to work with. It's important to share that I'm not trying to replace HR. I'm serving as a complement. So really any company that realizes that retention and recruitment is a pain point for them, that's who I'm looking to work with. So it really doesn't even matter which industry it is. It's just if they're ready to kind of admit that this is a pain point for them, which a lot of people don't like to admit that. But if you just bring in a third party to help with, understanding young professionals, that's going to have just tremendous impact on your business. And I think the people that I want to work with are the ones that really recognize that.
It's awesome. I love that. I love that. So, a lot of people have seen either experienced it themselves, seen in the media about struggling to get employees, dealing with young professionals, dealing with the great resignation. I mean, it's just been such turmoil in the employment market for the last, probably 24 months. I mean, you've probably seen some trends, but I'm sure those trends have probably shifted over those last couple of years.
They have. And, it's funny because I think you can't really go on LinkedIn today or the news without seeing the words Great Resignation. But one thing I always tell people is that I'm not an expert in all generations in the workforce. I'm an expert in the young professional generations, which I mentioned earlier is made up of millennials and the increasing number of Gen Zers. And so I'm not an expert in those other generations. I'm only an expert in young professionals. And so my vision when I read those blogs about the Great Resignation, or if I read something or if I hear something on the news about the Great Resignation, I'm constantly seeing changes and different differentiations between what I read and what I've heard, because they're not just talking about young professionals. They're really talking about, the entire workforce. And so some of those changes, just if you're curious, they're not talking about the core reasons why people leave. They're just saying, oh, well, remote work and pay. And, those are just some general things that could apply to anyone. But what I found through my interviews with these 500 plus young professionals is that it really comes down to one thing: communication. I told you about it earlier. Communication. I don't know how many more times I can say it, but when I look through the news and talk, hear about Great Resignation, I'm not seeing that. And it could be as simple as just making sure that the boss is not a micromanager to that young professional. It could be as simple as just adding in a little bit more contact from their manager on a, check-in level. So not micromanaging, but just offering that support. And it could just be as simple as being honest and, not shoving things under the rug. So there's a lot to dissect there, but I've noticed a ton of discrepancies between my trends that I found and the Great Resignation articles that seem to be popping up every day.
That was great feedback. Communication is such a huge piece that I go into most companies I work with, and they complain about communication, and then you start asking them, how can that improve? What are some of the things? And it never really seems to go anywhere, even down to things like annual reviews, which a lot of companies really struggle doing. So, I'm always trying to encourage them to do it at least every 6 months, or maybe you do it every quarter, or maybe even just do a touch base with them on a monthly basis, just so you can tweak things along the way. Mm-hmm. But then, companies then say, well, maybe we need to get more technical. Maybe we need to bring in a, company Slack channel. Maybe it might be a WhatsApp channel to try and get that communication going. So what are some of the things you've seen being successful with the communication part?
Yeah. So like you mentioned, having more consistent check-ins is generally always better. And I found that quarterly is the most successful. So sometimes monthly for the first 6 months that somebody's there is hands down. Like, you're going to want to be a little more hands-on, because especially if they're a fresh young professional, like 21, 22, straight out of college, first job, you do want to offer that little bit of hand-holding. In my personal opinion, other tips for communicating is just being as clear as possible and learning whoever you're working with communication style. That is really, really important. So you might be really comfortable with emailing back and forth, but I might not respond well to that. I might like calls better. I might like texting. Like, we all know that millennials and Gen Z love our phones. So I'm not saying that you should send, confidential work documents over the phone, but figure out what their communication style is and then set up meetings in that way. That's really a simple fix, but it can't just always be the way that it's always been done. And I think that kind of goes back to what we originally talked about at the beginning of the interview about these working generations and how they differ, and how, your generation might be saying, well, why should we do all of this for you? But again, we have to meet each other part way. And so I need to figure out what your email style is or your communication style. And you might want to figure out what mine is, and we can meet somewhere in the middle.
Right. No, it's an interesting point, because knowing a lot of the owners I work with, a lot of them might say, well, I want to control the communication because I want to try and control the dialogue. But then, owners or senior managers are typically the worst people to communicate, because, they're consumed with, bigger fires that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So, should you have somebody, a young professional in the company who's maybe, more in tune with what that communication looks like, the style of it, and then just get some type of approval or build that trust with senior leadership team, so that there is some type of an ongoing communication that fits everyone.
No, I think that's a great suggestion. And I do think that it really depends on the company, right? It depends on what their size is. It depends on what their current retention is. Like, you kind of have to look at all those pieces before you can really make a decision like that. But I think that's a wonderful suggestion.
Cool. So how do people, how can people work with you?
So what they can expect if they work with me is really a 3-part process. So you have a pain point, right? And you're looking to increase your retention of young professionals. So what you would do is we come in, we do a young professional assessment. And so we do what we do best. We interview young professionals at your company, both current and past employees. Depends on the size of your company. So if you have a really large company, we'll take a small sample. And if you work for a small company, we'll probably interview a lot more people. But from those interviews and that assessment, we come up with a customized plan or a formula for increased retention at your company. And then the third piece is that implementation piece. So what we figured out in the assessment and the customized plan, we actually implement that for you. So companies can hire me for the first 2 parts and then do the implementation on their own, or they can hire me for the full 3-part part system. And just some examples so you know what to expect. One example of a company that I've worked with is we found that the problem and why there was a hole in their retention was because of the recruitment process at the beginning. So a lot of times that's where communication is the worst, and people are maybe sending some false expectations their way. And so people get into the office and into the job and they're like, this is not what I was promised. And you know what young professionals do when they are not happy? They look at their phone. There's LinkedIn LinkedIn recruiters are on fire right now. And so there's always an opportunity to look for something else. So you want to make sure that you're getting them in the door. And so what we would do in that customized plan is create a strategy for how they're going to increase the recruitment strategy in order to increase retention. And so it's really going to look different for each company, but that's a little example of how we would work together. And then as far as recruiting goes, we offer different strategies to increase your recruitment, but it's going to look a little bit different than the retention strategy.
Right. No, great information. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard some numbers around that the cost of a turnover for an employee is usually equal to at least 1 to 3 times their salary. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't necessarily realize that because, they just think it's, one of those hidden costs.
Exactly.
So to spend money on that onboarding, that engagement, that communication piece, that's obviously going to save a ton of money.
It'll save so much money. And just think of how much time and money and energy your company spends on recruiting and investing in somebody to train them. Takes about 6 to 9 months to train them. That's the time that you're going to lose them, because they are we're not talking about retaining people who have been there for 5 years. That's important. And the work that we do together will only help you sustain that in the future. But we're trying to hit the core. We're trying to hit the people that are in their first 2 years of the company, and we're trying to get them to stay. And you're not going to do that with a lot of what companies are doing right now, which is not thinking that this is a problem, because it is a problem. And if you don't realize it now, you're going to realize it when it's too late.
Yeah, for sure. So how can people get hold of you?
So they can find me on LinkedIn, Kamber Parker. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So even if you're like, I want to figure out what this person's a little bit more about, then you can follow me on LinkedIn and start to just see some of the content that I put out. You can find me online at www.yoprono.com. There's actually a split screen when you get on there, and it's actually easy for you to navigate. So you can choose if you are a YoPro, and that'll take you to all of our stories and interviews and blogs. And then on the other side, it'll say, I want to hire a YoPro. So that is for the experienced professionals out there, and you'll be able to see what we can do to work together and schedule a free consultation.
Cool. Awesome. Kamber, I really enjoyed our conversation today. Hopefully people are listening. Hopefully people take some steps to try and improve that retention rate and really embrace, millennials, young professionals are not going away. So why not embrace them and figure out a way to how, to make them happy and hopefully stay there for 10, 20 years.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Robert.
Yeah. Thank you, Kamber. Take care. Hopefully that was pure dead brilliant for you today, and you got some great takeaways for your business or for your personal life. This is Robert Clinkenbeard along with David Edmondson. I would love to get you and your friends to join us on your journey. If you have any ideas for future speakers, or if you just want to pass this on to friends, family, other business colleagues to sign up and subscribe, that would be awesome. Anyway, thanks everyone, and have a great 2022. Cheers.